Hello, this year is dedicated to Lilu Nishmas Rachaleya Bas Rav Chaim Tzvi, and we're going to go right into the questions. Okay, I'm curious to know if there are degrees between fellow Jews in regards to giving. For example, something you would be willing to do for a good friend should you be equally willing to do for a stranger? Just a small example of this. A good friend of mine needed an old issue of a magazine. A few weeks later, a stranger posting on a mass community email list also needed an old issue of a magazine. I happen to have a pile of magazines in my house. Would it have been acceptable for me to be willing to go through the effort to look through the magazine pile for my friend and not for the stranger? Is it relevant at all to how people besides family are positioned in your life, or is a Jew a Jew? It's a complex question. So there are differences of degrees. So the first basis would be actual relatives. It says, Mi b'sarcha al titalem, so you have a different level of responsibility for actual relatives. If your cousin wants a magazine and somebody else wants the same magazine, you have to favor your cousin. But that's not the question you're asking right now. I'm going to give you another qualification. There are people to whom you owe a debt of gratitude. People who've been there for you when you needed them. So you owe them more in terms of response than you do to someone with whom you've had no interactions. So again, if somebody who was there for you, who gave you books when you were ill, now needs a book from you, of course they would come before a stranger. Next qualification. Okay, if there's someone who you dislike, and you're trying to get past that dislike, it would be worth your while to favor them over somebody who you don't know at all. Next qualification. If you have somebody who's part of the inner community of Ovdei Hashem, people who are Shomer Mitzvah, and people who are not as yet Shomer Mitzvah, and you only have one magazine, there's something to be said for giving preference to somebody who's part of the inner circle of those who keep mitzvot, who are Ovdei Hashem. Okay, but all of the four examples I gave, have to do with if you only have one magazine. But that's not your question. Your question is it right when you have what somebody else wants to withhold it from them? So, from what I'm hearing is, if somebody is close to you, either as a relative or because you owe them some gratitude, then you would be willing to do it, but for someone who you don't know, you wouldn't be. So here the question is much different, which is, what do we owe strangers? So we're not talking about harming them. You certainly wouldn't harm a stranger in any way. So our obligation to loving one's fellow Jew extends to Jews who are not our friends. There are three laws: that we should speak well of them, that we should give them honor, and that we should care for their needs. So exactly how necessary a magazine is, I don't venture to say, but certainly it's an opportunity to extend yourself to your fellow Jew, to let them feel one with you, to care for them. Look through the pile and give the magazine. Now, if your life is extremely hectic, and you don't even have time to give a bedtime story to your own kids, don't look through the pile of magazines. Not for your friend and not for a stranger. If there's a little bit more space, and again you have to choose between your friend and a stranger, go for the friend, because you probably owe them some gratitude. But if that's not the case, of course you should extend yourself to someone else. Why shouldn't you? Okay, every year when I hear the Megillah, I am haunted by this is a very hard thing to read, the font here is strange, by the tragedy of Esther, who was forced to, let's see what this could be. I assume that you're troubled with Esther, and I'm going to make up the question because I can't read the font. Okay, so every year when you read the Megillah, when I read the Megillah, I'm troubled by Esther's tragedy. she was married to Mordechai, and she had to compromise her marriage, and she had to live with Achashverosh. And if Hashem's ways are good for everyone, he could have saved the Jews without putting Esther through so much sacrifice. Okay, so how could we understand her personal suffering? Okay, so the Esther story is complex. The story really doesn't end, as you know, with a now the Jews were saved, but Esther did continue living in the palace with Achashverosh. She had his child, Daryavish II, who didn't identify himself as a Jew, even though in Halacha he was a Jew. And he was instrumental in building the Second Temple, in bringing forth the situations in which the Second Temple could be built. What's